Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier once again with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index, theartistindex.com, and graciously supported by Heavenly Spirits Imports, without whom this would not be possible. We are also working in collaboration with the New Bedford Whaling Museum and their Common Ground project. And with that in mind, as we always do, I will allow the guest to introduce themselves and to spell their names for the record.
Thanks. Hi, I am Tobey Eugenio, spelled T-O-B-E-Y, Eugenio, E-U-G-E-N-I-O.
Okay, now there's got to be a name or a story in there. I haven't done one in several episodes because the names have been almost too normal. Not that yours isn't normal, but I mean, with my name alone, sure. I have had to make some appointments. I don't know how many times I had to spell my name. They just kept, it's like, no, F-O-R-T and F-O-U. No. So do you have any other similar kind of stories?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Before I was married, I was Toby Bennett. So I got a lot of, are you Tony Bennett's daughter or son? I sometimes get that with the name Toby. It's and then Eugenio is my husband's Portuguese. And so I've just learned to spell it when I say it because people think it's a U, they're looking up your name. And so I just say Eugenio, E-U-G-E-N-I-O. And so that creates a lot of clarity around that for sure. But it definitely gets said lots of different ways. And people don't always hear it for sure.
It's amazing.
But,
amazing.
Communicating clearly is important. So I've learned to just share.
So let's tell the folks what you do, because I believe out of the 100 and, oh my goodness, I think you will be either 106 or 105. That's a lot of podcasts. Could you please tell us, I feel like the old What's My Line television show, which was a classic. I think they actually tried to bring it back a couple of times. It never lasted as long as the first one. But what is it that you do?
Yeah, so I currently have a couple of different jobs. My largest job, or the one I spend the most time doing currently, is as the creativity director at our sister school here in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And what that is ultimately is I am not only the art and STEAM teacher, I am also overseeing the creative and innovative curriculum of our team. So when I'm not teaching formally in the classroom, I'm supporting other teachers in ways in which they can integrate creativity and innovation and engineering into classrooms. And so we create those real world connections. So at OSS, that is part of my job. At OSS, I also work as the outdoor classroom designer. So when I'm not at OSS, I have the luxury of, I spent the last maybe 8 or 9 years designing outdoor learning spaces and maker spaces around the country as a consultant. And so what's neat about that, I don't have a landscape degree, but I have an education degree. And I got partnered up probably about 10 years ago with an organization in Nebraska called Nature Explore. And Nature Explore is an organization that has looked really intentionally at outdoor play and the value of outdoor play, and how do you connect it with education and important learning for humans, whether they're little people or large, older humans. And in working with Nature Explore, they have a fundamental belief, different than maybe some other organizations, where they pair a landscape designer and an educator together. And they're a team, and they actually go to a site and they talk about the landscape needs, but also the educational needs. And so, we would have to consider things collectively together, like, what are some native plants? How do we take care of those plants? But additionally, we think about, gosh, if we're going to make a space to gather, what should that look like? Well, we have 5-year-olds, or we have 14-year-olds. What kind of educational needs will they be experiencing, and also what are the teachers in those buildings or that museum or that library, how are they going to use the space? And so I've had the luxury of kind of traveling around the country, and most recently doing a design here at OSS, where we look at creating spaces. And mostly I spend my time outdoors doing the natural spaces, but I've done some work with some children's museums around maker spaces, right? So creating spaces where humans have an opportunity to make and play and explore and engineer. So that's like kind of my other job. And then my third job is I do educational consulting. So before I came to OSS, I was on the road, traveling around mostly New England, doing educational workshops for teachers around everything from team building to brain-based best practices to integrating curriculum. And my passion truly is I am still a middle school learner. I think I find wonder and joy in learning. And so being able to share those techniques and experiences with other educators collectively, not so much as an expert, but I believe I'm a collector of good ideas, which I think being the creativity director at OSS is such a beautiful fit for me. And so those are kind of my current jobs other than being a mom of children.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to STEAM because I don't think a lot of people know what STEAM is. They've probably heard of STEM. So other than just adding an A, could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so fundamentally STEAM, so science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics is around the idea of STEM. And it actually started at RISD in Rhode Island, the idea that, okay, you need to have an A because you can't do any of the other things without thinking about art and what art brings to the table. And so when you're teaching STEAM, and really STEM in the sense of it's inferred, but those of us who believe in the creative endeavors and innovation and creativity, I think are synonymous. But I really, the reason, when we were thinking about my current title and thinking about STEAM, it's understanding fundamentally my own life's work is around the idea that the human is a creative being. And when we tap into our creative potentials, I think humanity has so much opportunity to be its best self. And yeah, so I could talk all about that. But so STEAM in general is around the idea of using technology. Now, technology, people say, oh gosh, it's going to be things I plug in or things I code. Technology is anything that's man-made that we use to do a better job. So that could be a sewing needle, that could be a hammer, that could be a robot, that could be a laser cutter. And so in OSS, we have something called the Creative Suite, which includes an art room or an art studio, a STEAM lab, and a media lab. And so students work between those spaces, and STEAM is part of that. And if I was to give like a full definition, STEAM is basically good teaching and integration of all subjects. It's real life.
Yeah, you pretty much described my undergraduate art experience because, it did encompass everything. Even the mathematics, the golden mean, proportional, scale, all of those things come together. The technology, we use paintbrushes and other tools. So, it does go the full gamut. And I think it's always in education has always been this push and pull kind of thing of decentralization, centralization, decentralization, centralization. And it's crazy. They never find a middle ground. I think probably STEAM has done that. One of the things that sparked a thought was every year since I was, before I could even walk, my dad would take me to the family farm up in Quebec, up in Canada. And that experience has been long lasting. You talk about maker spaces, you talk about, designing rooms and so on and so forth. Everything there's a season, there's everything. And his dream was to buy a farm and get kids that were at risk and bring them to the farm and show them the routine of farm life, not as a punishment, but as an incredible joy about discovering themselves, being connected with nature better, and so many other things. Let's go back to OSS, because a lot of people, we talked about how to spell your name. How do we spell our sister school?
That's a great question, and I think sharing about fundamentals of our sister school. So it's our, O-U-R, then sisters with an S apostrophe. That's important, school. And with our sister school, while it may sound like a religious school, it is non-denomination. It is a school for economically disadvantaged inner city girls. And we are in New Bedford on the backside of the synagogue, Temple Israel, right near Buttonwood Park. And so we are a tuition-free school. All students here do not pay tuition, but with that, we don't get state or federal funding. So we always said that our sister school exists by the gifts and the kindness of others. Our school is tiny but mighty. Our young humans engage in everything from outdoor learning, right? So we have our outdoor lab or outdoor STEAM classroom to community boating. Community is campus, where we take our students out into the community. Our school day is longer. It's a 10-hour school day. And we do that with intentionality. We intentionally give students time to read during SSR. We have an outdoor play time / lunch time. We have community meetings. We have advisory. We really are invested in the social and emotional learning of our students, as well as the academics. And OSS is a really cool place. This is my 7th year being here. And I think it's one of the best places to practice all the things I write about in books we get to do here.
Back to the alphabet soup. SSR, for people who don't know.
Yeah, sustained silent reading. I forget sometimes. Yeah, so it was something I think happened back when I was a young human. And reading, we know, is a fundamental necessity for gaining and understanding language. And reading certainly isn't a favorite of a lot of humans, or at least can be stereotypically not a favorite. But we build it into our curriculum. And we make it a part of the learning so that we're sure our students read comfortably. We have public speaking, so yeah, SSR, or sustained silent reading, is a commitment every single day at our school without being outside.
As a former middle school substitute teacher many, many years ago, one of the things that I was amazed at in meeting the students, and I don't like to refer to them as the girls because it's too easy to do that. And for some reason, it seems demeaning, but they were all engaged. They made eye contact. You could tell the gears were turning in their head all the time. They're always trying to get to the next step before you, which is a great thing. And it also, as I was telling a couple of them, how in parochial school, even though it was co-ed, it was split. Many of the activities were split into boys only, girls only. Going to church, it was the girls on one side, the boys on the other side. And, there are people who still kind of frown on that kind of thing, but there is a necessity to that, isn't there? Especially in education where, and to use the term, girls don't feel they are with their peers. Okay, with their gender peers. They don't feel overwhelmed. They're not distracted. There's a whole bunch of other dynamics that are no longer an issue when it's all single gender. How important is that?
Yeah, so it's I think it's fundamentally very important. Not like an absolute, I've taught in public school. I've seen really beautiful things. I think what OSS does is it takes a very small group of humans and gives them an opportunity during one of the most developmentally challenging, it's the second time your brain grows the most in your lifetime, 0 to 2, and then that 10 to 14 timeframe, where if we can create a space and a place for our humans, our young women, to feel connected and really focus on themselves by being a single sex middle school, we have those opportunities, and we can delve deeper into topics that are relevant, that are specific to, while we are a world that is looking for equality and everything from gender to race, I think that, we are still not there yet. And so, it would be cool if someday we get into a world where we can think about a school that doesn't need to exist because there is equal opportunities. But still, the research says, young women in the sciences and the maths and STEM or STEAM are not finding their place as naturally as young men. And yeah, so we do believe fundamentally it's a necessity and important work.
In fact, oddly enough and topically, there's a professor from the University of Iowa who was under incredible fire for saying during a convention that only men should apply for law, engineering, and medicine. And he tried to defend himself, and it's turned into a real nasty quagmire.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. What I love about OSS, while we are still intentionally a school for young women, we also work really hard in all of our curriculum to create understanding, inclusivity, trying to, as we like to say, a lot of people talk about the golden rule, right? Where you do unto others as you would want done unto yourself. OSS really believes in the platinum rule, which is do unto others as they would like to have done to themselves. And so that means you have to be an active listener, an active participator, and really understand and have empathy. And so as a school, we work at those pieces and we really think intentionally. And we are seeing anecdotally our young humans entering into the STEAM fields and the STEM fields more so than perhaps they have in the past. And that's important because we are a technically savvy, right, information age world. And so that's important, as it is to just learn how to take care of yourself, right? As care providers, yeah, it's important.
You were talking about designing outdoor spaces and such, and for some reason, the word sculpture garden popped into my head. We don't have a sculpture garden. That is the one thing that we don't have. I know a couple of years back, I don't know if it was successful, and if it was, is it still being maintained? But labyrinths were considered, all of a sudden, it was a very hot thing. And they have, if you could combine a labyrinth with a sculpture garden, there's just something about a sculpture garden that is so totally different from going indoors into a gallery to see two-dimensional work stuck on a wall.
Sure, for sure. Yeah, I mean, what's nice about so a sculpture garden has real value. I do think a sculpture garden that changes is really important. I like the idea of art that's ephemeral and also flexible and allows all humans to have access. I love like the work that, for example, DAPMA does around pop-up exhibits or local artists who are, it's, museum without walls. So I love the idea of like a sculpture garden, it's that same piece. But I like the semi-permanent idea, which is important. And I think about in outdoor classroom designs, which you could say is an outdoor classroom park or an outdoor learning space, right? Which can happen anywhere. And as a matter of fact, New Bedford, Buttonwood Zoo has a space, Charlie's Place, which is another space where families can gather. One of my favorite parts of outdoor learning spaces that could happen in a sculpture garden is large loose parts, right? Abilities to manipulate large logs, large sticks. How does one design and engineer a future building if one doesn't understand how soil works and how it feels and what's native to their environment? And I got into this work, about 15 years ago, and they were saying the average student or average child was spending, 75% of its time in front of a screen, something insane. It was like 7 or 8 hours, not 75%, 7 or 8 hours in front of a screen. And I thought, that's absurd. That's not even possible. And one would argue that even in the last couple of years, the amount of time young humans are spending in front of a screen is rewiring their brains. So they're not handling large loose parts or messing around and being in outdoor spaces the same way. So I think a sculpture park, or at the very least a park that invites humans to view, interact, to become part of the moments. Like, so I could see, I love watching humans build forts and often put those in spaces, hammocks hanging where people can talk and be flexible. And yeah, I think that could be a neat addition.
Well, those are things that we used to do my generation as kids, which they call free play now, but it was, we'd go out in the woods. If you lived even in an urban environment, if there was a wooded lot or some place that was kind of accessibly remote, but because it was woods, and we would set up the forts and set out territories. It's like a little versions of Lord Jim. It was a little scary sometimes, but
one of my
also
favorite one of my favorite stories is when I was a young human, my dad every single year would take a dump truck full of sand. I grew up really very rural, and just put it in the backyard. And the entire summer, we just turned that sandbox into a little city with water and buildings. And when I first built outdoor space at Heritage Museums and Gardens, Hidden Hollow, and my mom came, she's like, Toby, that's just a bigger version of your sandbox. You've just been messing around building, in that particular space, I built a 2-story treehouse with upper Vogue tech and, had made a water fountain and, all these things, but I had done it as young children. And I think that's why it's so important, is that I built that understanding of physical space and comfort. And so when I had an opportunity to use like backhoes and bulldozers and drill companies to create a space that could feel inviting and build skills and understanding and connection to nature and each other, it was such a natural fit. Had I not done those things as a young human, maybe not been able to design and continue to design spaces that feel just right.
Yeah, it's funny because with so many artists that I've interviewed for this podcast, one thing I keep going back to is childhood experience or experiences in childhood where it's not even an experience sometimes, it's just exposure. I've had guests who both parents were involved in the arts, but never ever pushed the children, never even engaged them in what they did, just by being around. And which brings me to something I remember, from when I was going for my educational studies, that a child whose bedroom has bookshelves is more apt to be successful in school, regardless of whether or not they've ever opened any of those books. Just being surrounded by the books physically was enough to garner some sort of curiosity or comfort or familiarity. It's just really,
well,
really
it's a value
amazing
system in some ways too, right? As it's an opportunity, like we value, we're taking space in our home to do these things, and not all families are, have the resources to make that happen,
Right.
which is why it's so fundamentally important that we make sure resources get into all homes and make that happen. I'm an avid reader for sure.
Well, I have another question going back in the time machine, but before that, many years ago, I was a chaperone for the Great Outdoors Club, which was out of New Bedford High School, where my eldest daughter went. I had been in the Boy Scouts. I was just one step shy of Eagle Scout when it became unpopular to be a Boy Scout anymore. Social pressures and that kind of thing. But everything I learned in the Boy Scouts, I still retain to this very day. But what amazed me is going on these hikes where we'd climb, all the in between Massachusetts and Maine. We covered several mountains, and to see kids who were from, to use it, for lack of a better term, the inner city, frightened to death of being in the woods and with other people. They were frozen solid. They were totally out of their comfort zone. And I found that so sad. I mean, here's a place where this is a sanctuary for them, and yet they couldn't engage. They were totally out of their element.
It's an interesting concept, and I would say that given as our disconnect in nature grows and grows, I think that phenomenon is spreading to all areas of our world, not just one experience or one living condition, because we're not getting out the same way we used to for all sorts of reasons. And I think it makes it even more paramount that we provide three-dimensional experiences for humans. there's certainly some research that says some of the 2D stuff we're doing with technology has grown our dendrites in our brains, and that makes sense. And there's some value. Perhaps students are reading sooner and learning, but I mean, we're at what cost, right? So we think about the social and emotional health of our humans, and we know we're in a little bit of a crisis, or a lot in a crisis. I don't have the data, so I don't want to overemphasize or underemphasize. But I think we do have to think about what is it that we're doing. And as a mom who has teenage daughters, so cell phones weren't too much in my kid's life until high school and now college. We used to have a lot of conversations about when could be used, never at the dinner table, never at restaurants. But I understand the struggle. It's real. It's addictive. I mean, I know that Instagram and Facebook, there's some conversation about, what currently is doing and how we're doing it. And I think it's important as a STEM educator or a STEAM educator to think about why it matters that we teach our students how to be consumers and selective in their consumerism. And it's powerful. And when I think about going back just a second to when you were talking about some of your childhood memories and hiking, and my memory in the sandbox and building souffles, I love to build mud souffles. Like, honestly, I've never actually cooked a real souffle, but I've made a whole heck of mushroom and fern souffles. And those are considered sticky memories. One of the coolest things I did when I was working in the museum world is this idea of like, how do you make sticky memories that stick in your brain for long periods in our lifetime? Like, you could always go back to it, you're 70 or 80 years old, and those sticky memories are really valuable. And what's interesting in the research that I did at that time was that experiences with dioramas and things in nature, when you can mess around and use things and touch things and feel things and smell things. And if you're on a two-dimensional device, that changes things, right? There's no variance. And so a lot of our senses aren't being engaged in the same kind of way. And so I think when we think about learning in schools, and, people will say to me, so you're an artist, right? What's your art? And a lot of times, I used to feel like, gosh, should I tell them I oil paint when I have free time? Do I tell them? And now, unabashedly, honestly, when people say, what is your art? I say my art is creating spaces and places for other humans to capitalize on their creativity. That's my art. Like, that is my canvas. My canvas is an outdoor space. My canvas is a classroom. My canvas is a random room in a museum where I want to create that intergenerational interaction between humans and create independence. And so the space can almost work without a facilitator. And I really think about that. And that means you're naming things. So in an outdoor space, we might have a gathering space. We might have a create space. Often in my outdoor spaces, we might engrave a rock to give that invitation. I call it the invitations to learn, right? And so the more independence we have, and what's cool about having students more than once, like our outdoor space, or even in classes in the creative suite, is we want to create a cognitive mental map, right? So the more people understand, so even if it's a sculpture garden in New Bedford, when we create familiarity and the ability to know where things are, right? Even in your own studio or your own kitchen, it's a lot easier to get to creating and cooking and making and doing when you know where those things are. And so when you're designing, so my art is focused on designing those spaces for humans so that they can self-regulate, self-initiate, work connectively to others, feel empowered to embrace their own creativity. Because like I said before, I fundamentally believe the more ability we understand that we are creators and innovators, the more power we have to build capacity for a better world. Like that is my art. And so, yeah, I paint on the side too. But I am a practicing artist. And sometimes, if you teach art, you're not, no, I am creating that. So I think that's like so important.
Yeah, I mean, you got me to thinking that I taught for most of my adult life, and it's not just being a portal where you take all this, like a funnel, you take all this information and you pour it into the funnel and then you try to squeeze it into their ears. It's a little bit different. If I always used to say, if I'm not teaching, I'm not learning. If I'm not learning, I can't teach. So it was, that kind of thing. And it's it's changed quite a bit because when I was substituting in the 80s, it was about survival as an instructor. It's about discipline or the lack of discipline. It was a total mess. And the whole educational system, when we started busing, we lost our neighborhood characteristics. It's kind of insane that we have buses. Why can't they just, I lived in Portugal for a year. I never saw a school bus. And in my walks around town, I saw 2 or 3 schools, and the children live around that area, go to that school. And there's no traffic jams in the morning. There's no traffic jams, when school lets out. It's just the weirdest thing. It works.
It is. Education, it's interesting because education, I mean, I've been in education for 30 years, almost. I'm pretty close to that. I lose track. It's all about enjoying the moments. But I do think that education is a pendulum, and it goes back and forth, and we learn. I do think education continues to evolve. And it's a tricky profession. People don't realize that when you're with students, you can't do, I always say, like, I'm with students from like 9 or 8 to 5. That's when I'm with humans and interacting. And then I have to do all the planning, thinking, grading, collaborating, meeting all the other time. And that means I'm doing it till 11, 12 at night. And so it's not an easy profession, but if it's one that you do passionately, I honestly, I think I have the coolest job in the whole wide world. I love what I do for work. I love, those moments, and, kind of building on what you were just saying about curriculum. And this is fundamentally really important to me. And it builds on that idea of creative capacity is one that when you're, my computer, when you're designing a space, that's the third teacher, right? So the classroom is a teacher. The teacher is a teacher, and the curriculum is a teacher. And all 3 of those really need to align to empower. And one of the things that I would love to share a little bit about is the idea of creating choice or teaching for artistic behavior. So even in the beginning of my career, I could never get around this idea of like, okay, everybody, we're all going to draw a fish today. We're all going to draw a fish, and this is how you make bubbles, and let's add a fin. And I never could get there. It just never made sense to me as a teacher or a learner, right? I've been teaching a long time, and I really came into teaching for artistic behaviors, or TAB, which it's a name for choice. It's a fundamental, but it was actually founded in Middleborough by Kathy Douglas, who was working in Bridgewater at the time, years and years ago, and this idea that when we teach art or STEAM or any of our classes, we want to teach for artistic behavior. And teaching for artistic behavior means that you are a guide on the side. You are not necessarily telling the students, you do this, then you do this. It doesn't mean you're not giving instruction.
Yeah, it's not.
Right,
I mean,
right.
It's Thanksgiving. It's Halloween. You're going to do the jack-o'-lantern. It's Thanksgiving. You're going to do the pumpkin or the turkey. There was a neighbor whose child.
Go ahead.
There's a neighbor who pulled her child out of school because she came home in tears, and it was in her art class that caused this emotional upheaval. And they were told to draw a picture of the sky, and she drew a sunset, and the teacher said, "That's not the sky. Sky is blue and the sun is yellow." And she said, "Well, I'm sorry, but my dad and I stood on the back porch last night and watched the sunset, and it was all red." Whoa.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting phenomenon, and I really am proud of. I see the education art world really making some strides, and the idea of teaching for artistic behaviors. What I love about it, it has 3 foundational beliefs, right? What do artists actually do? That's what we're teaching. The child is the artist, right? It's not us dumping in. You were talking about the sponge or the sieve. We're not dumping in information. The child is practicing like an authentic artist, and the classroom is their studio. Right. So that's this idea that there's opportunity for students to self-initiate. And it can look very different depending on the day. But if you're truly teaching for artistic behaviors, or you're truly creating opportunities for students to work as artists, then you need to give them space. And, it could be that you're teaching a demo in the morning that shows them, we're going to have just say pencil stations open, but there's some different options in what you can do with graphite, or maybe today it's graphite and fiber studio, and you can work in either space and you can self-regulate. And, and then I do, particularly in my upper grade, 7th and 8th grade, I give full choice to students. And so they know where the materials are. Sometimes we work through theme, and sometimes it's like one idea sparks another idea that sparks another idea. And honestly, as a white woman teaching in a middle school that is awesomely diverse, I don't want to assume that I know what they should or shouldn't do, particularly on subject area and subject matter. I need to be open to the possibilities. And so what I can do is provide expertise on how to use materials like pastels and watercolor, and allow students to let their interests lead them, let their curiosity lead them, let their wonder lead them, let the desire to make a gift for another human lead them, and allow that process to evolve. Because, what is my end goal? Is my end goal that they all can make fish? Or is my end goal that they see themselves as artists that are able to solve and make a difference in the world? And so that's really important. And what I love about my work here at OSS is that we name that. Our students understand that. They understand how we operate. They know that as an artist, they're going to use envisioning as a technique, or engaging and persisting, expressing themselves, developing craft. Like, they can use that language. And that commonality of language lets us have really in-depth conversations. So when students are mid-trimester, they'll meet with me and we talk about, hey, what have you been doing? How have you been doing it? What are you interested in? And right now I had a couple of 8th graders this past trimester say, I'm really looking for some different ideas that are totally out there. Can you help me? And, when we really dug deep into it, and they're just really looking at new ways to use mediums and materials. And again, if I was the one leading, right, standing in front of the room, I'm deciding on the project, on the materials, the how, the why, the what. All I'm asking students to do is replicate, which is like factory-esque. Right? It's industrial
assembly line. Yeah.
What end? So it's cute. And sometimes I have to say, and my students love to do like a tutorial online, and that's okay too. Right? Bob Ross and his lessons, there's not devalue. It's not one or the other. It's just allowing an artist to be an artist and practice just like you would in your own studio. Sometimes you spend an entire day talking to a colleague about ideas. Other times you're out collecting ideas. Other times you're making, and you don't even know what time of day it is. You've been in the process of that painting, and time has just disappeared for you. So if we're to truly give that opportunity and recognize that regardless of your age, you're still human, and you still have this glorious thing called a brain and a heart, and you can use it at any age. And so, we don't want to disenfranchise or separate those pieces from our human. Why does education? So I feel super, super blessed that I get to be in a place where I can take all of these practices and put them to work.
Art education was almost like considered entertainment, or it wasn't serious. It wasn't a subject. It was an activity. Right. And I didn't realize how bad it was until I taught my first adult learner class. My goal had been to teach at the college level, but I had an opportunity to teach adults, and it was the most heart-wrenching experience I ever had in my life. I felt all of a sudden that I was no longer an art instructor, but I was an art therapist, because the stories of these people, some of them in midlife, some of them further on, who decided, darn it, I'm going to go and I'm going to pursue what I used to love as a child, and no one is going to stop me this time. And there were those who felt that they were really good, and they were told, somebody stuck the pin in their balloon and said, put that stuff away, that's childish, you've got to get yourself a real job. And and there's a litany of stories that are all very, very similar. And here are adults, and I always liken them to be birds with broken wings, and I found that really, really, really sad.
Yeah, I think past practices, not all, and I don't want to overgeneralize. So I do think there's sometimes an okay place for that, not breaking their wings, but having direct instruction. I think there can be a place for that, and it comes from a place of non-judgment. But when you think about what you want to do to empower a learner, to give place and space for humans to do their thing, it's real practice. You have to know how to envision. And people say, well, what are you actually teaching? They're just doing whatever they want. Oh my goodness. My students leave me after 8th grade, right? They go to high schools. Now, statistically, we all know in society, how many of those humans are actually going to take formal art classes? Not so many. And that's not that it's not okay, or it is. I mean, I guess it is okay with me, because in reality, what is more important to me is that I make sure that my students believe in their creative potential and that they are artists at heart, that the value of art is humanity's ability to see, observe, look, interact, use art as a vehicle for advocacy and agency to change the world, to use their knowledge, their information to take care of humanity. And so it's interesting, because I have to undo some of the elementary school experiences, because I get students in 5th grade. And one of the first things I do with 6th graders, I take them to art court, and I'm the judge. And I started college, to backtrack for a second, I was pre-law. And
all right,
I taught,
because I've been waiting for the moment to ask you. Let's
so I was
roll back to the
pre-law.
beginning.
I always had a big mouth. I love to talk. It's obvious. You can hear me enjoying just sharing. And I was like, I need to change the world. I got to use my voice to change the world. I'm going to do this. And I worked a couple of jobs to pay for college, and one of them was teaching preschool. And as I was doing that work and kind of developing, I was like, gosh, this feels really interesting and really great. I don't want to be poor, so I probably shouldn't choose education, which is fundamentally wrong, but that's a whole nother thing. And we won't get into that, or maybe we will. But and so then I was like, oh, I'll be an art therapist, so I can still make a difference, but I'm not going into that education world. And then I realized, okay, well, the jobs for art therapists are few and far between. I was putting myself through college, and I thought, gosh, if I graduate from college after 4 years of working 3 jobs, and I can't actually get a job until I get a master's, oh goodness, I'm really going to be in a pickle. And then I was like, oh, you silly, you can actually teach art education, and that in itself is therapy. You are helping humans. So I entered the art field with that intention from the beginning, that I believed that giving people a space to take care of themselves in creative ways. There's reasons why older humans, when they retire, find art again, because it is a therapy. And then people find doodling in a journal, or, and I think art, is everything from making a bed and picking out your clothes in the morning to all those things, which brings me to art court. So when I first started teaching art, I would run into this idea that students would say to me, I'm not an artist. I don't know why I have to take art. I can't draw like Johnny over here. Johnny's a really good cartoon artist. Why am I here? I don't make art. This is weird. Why should I have to, And so I was always like, and I'd keep saying to them, like, art's everywhere and art's awesome, but they're middle schoolers, and they were like, whatever, teach, you don't know what you're talking about. And I kept saying, I can't tell them. I have to show them and expose them to the idea and let them discover the meaning. And so years and years ago, I decided to do art court, which basically I took on the role as judge, which was super fun for me. And I would assign professions to every student. Every student would get a profession. And they would go home and do homework, and they would have to decide if the job I gave them, truck driver, lawyer, doctor, grocer, designer, graphic designer, if their job had art-related qualities or not. Did that job envision? Did that job have to develop craft? Did they have to persevere? Did they have to engage and persist? Did they have to understand the world in order to make and do their work? And so they would come back the next day, and they'd have to prove whether or not their job had art-related qualities or not. And then from that point on, other than them saying, can we do art court again? I found I didn't have to tell students the reason why they were with me, that they could see that if I want to be a surgeon, it's valuable for me to understand and grow my creative skills, my art skills. It's valuable for me to grow my understanding so that I can be a better lawyer, and I can learn the art of public speaking and the art of body language and the art of visuals, right? And how I tell an impactful story and how I create a public service announcement. And so, when I think about the work I get to do every day, my students may not take a formal art classroom, but by the time they leave me, I believe that they are creative beings that can use all the tools. Like I think about my 4 years with our students here at our sister school, they're filling that toolbox, right? They're literally filling the toolbox with different tools. I know how to use a laser cutter. I know how to use an iPad. I know how to talk and make an argument about why this is important. I know how to look more closely at art. I know how to build things with wood. Henceforth, when I run into a dilemma, I know how when I get stuck and my entire project falls down or my life falls down around me, what are steps I can take so there's relatability? It's not just physical, but it can be emotional. And so when they leave, I'm hopeful that they can see how being that creative individual will help them have and live a better life and impact others in the process.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to it and so much more to it. You know, the instructors that I had, they sit on my shoulders or I stand on theirs. To this day, almost 50 years later. And, you know, we're told it's about solving problems. And the moment you solve a problem, you create another problem to solve, and it just keeps going. And you have to know just when to stop. It's also about seeing relationships. It's about seeing patterns. And that's very important. And it really it does influence a lot of your life. I do remember after teaching the first of several of the adult learner drawing classes, that people, the students would come in and tell me, you know, I nearly got into an accident last night on the way home because I'm driving, minding my own business, and like, ooh, look at that tree. They were totally spaced out. And I said, well, yeah, you really have to know that, you know, when you're driving, you're driving. When you're not, you know, you have time for that. So
Right.
it does impact them, you know, quite a bit. So where do you see, I mean, I was there just a couple of weeks ago. That was a great experience to talk to them about storytelling and how to use art for storytelling. But I think there's just so much more, and it's not as a criticism. There's just so much more that could be done. I think we even discussed something, you know, I've had this conversation before, and a lot of people have chimed in. At first, I thought we needed a high school for the visual and performing arts, and like, no. We need a middle school or junior high and high school for visual and performing arts, because it's so important. And whether you know go on and don't become a prima ballerina, or you're not an exhibiting artist or whatever, I know it sounds crazy, but it really doesn't matter, because there are people, as we know, in other professions who went into law and ended up doing something else, and went into science and ended up doing something else. So why is it not okay, you know, to go into art and have to do something else?
Right. Well, and I think that's, you know, I'm hopeful. I think that the work that just the city of New Bedford is doing in the community of New Bedford around the arts and creativity, there's just so many awesome humans working on behalf of the community and breaking down some of those barriers. I do feel like New Bedford's in its own new renaissance, and that's exciting. I don't necessarily know, you know, is it a facility? Is it, you know, a creativity school versus like naming it, like breaking down some of those barriers, right? So I don't go to an art school. I mean, I did not choose an art high school or college for that matter, because I was taught by society that I'd be, you know, not make money, whatever those pieces are. I have since learned that I am rich in so many other kinds of ways, and I'm following my heart, and that's important. I do think that a good educational system, and this is on even my own like personal love, is that I still feel like I'm 12 or 13 years old, and I innately wonder about things all the time. And I am interested, and that's what I hope for a lot of people. I mean, I was reading autobiography or a biography about Da Vinci, because he didn't write it, around just his creative process, and that like wondering and just digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that's what I hope humans can do, is like not get caught up in just the one solution, or this is good enough, or I'm doing it for somebody else, but rather I'm just really interested. And you know,
I am curious mind.
Yeah, I am so innately curious. I love the world, and I really hope to impart that in whatever is a just right fit. You know, I always say that not everyone presents the same way, not everyone cares about the same things, but collectively, if we really are, if our ultimate goal is to make the world a better place and to be better humans, and to, you know, I'm a big believer in creating memories and, you know, authentically being present in your moments. You know, those are things that I hope for humanity. It's just so important. And I do think, when you talk about teaching, one of the things that I've been working hard on, even though I'm here at OSS, is also teaching teachers, right? To have those, to actually share the work that I'm doing with others. And not, again, it's not, I have learned from so many other humans. I am far from an expert in my field. I am simply really passionate and I love to help. And I've taken the time to not only present to other educators, but I take our students with us. They present and they share because their voices are just as brilliant and powerful, if not more so. And so I think as we think about how we move forward and decide what does it look like, how do we break down these walls and think about education without walls, and is the pendulum shifting yet again? I don't know. I'm going to hopefully be around for about 100 years, and when I have been around, I'll probably have seen some educational shifts. I'm hopeful that we don't go back to the rudimentary memorization, which is only good
what I call the read.
right?
Yeah, read, remember,
Right.
regurgitate. Yeah.
Yeah, but in that particular case, there is some value for certain type of brains. I love the brain. I get really excited about brain research, and it's ever evolving. Right. And some humans do really well. That's really how they learn.
Well, you have to learn a periodic table.
Right.
You have to learn the alphabet. That's
or you
all
have to know how to look it up, I always say.
Yeah,
or know how to look it up, right?
Well, we're gonna have to start wrapping this up. So I'm going to ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to pull it out of my Barbara Walter bag of questions. And her magic wand question is a classic, but especially in this particular case, if you were given a magic wand and it only had one trick, in other words, it was a one time only, there was no three wishes, what would you do for our sister school?
That's an amazing question. Wow.
It would have to be almost the first thing that pops into your head.
Yeah, I feel like it's unlimited funding because we don't get state or federal funding. And so we dream big. We work really hard to make resources happen. We don't own our building, and in some ways that's on purpose so that we can be in the community, and there's a lot of thoughts. But I think unlimited funds to be innovators and not worry about that resource probably would be I think that's probably the most realistic. And also educators who want to, diverse educators who really want to help us in our mission. That would be part of that magic wand, I think, too, because we want to build capacity, and we believe in windows and mirrors, and we believe that our students should see humans that look like them and have shared experiences. So we're always looking for diverse educators and courses.
And okay, so this is the final thing. What do you think of an Our Brothers school?
Yeah, I think that some people always say that Nativity Prep is kind of a version of our sister school. And I think it's very possible. I do think that as we come to changing times, we're thinking about a women-centered institution, right? So, to honor all humans who are, whether they identify as female. there's a lot of conversation we're having around how can we be inclusive and also still honor needs that need to be met. And so, I think that currently, we're small and mighty, and our mission is very succinct. And people say, oh, you're going to become a high schooler, oh, you're going to get bigger. And the reality is, we know small community matters and it impacts. And when you only have a small amount, and listen, I was a public school teacher. I love that just as much. This is the home that I'm living in currently and really love it. And I see different values that I'm able to make happen. And I think it's all good. And I think that when we can be kinder to educators who really do work 17 hours a day on average all year. There's no such thing as summer vacation, not truly. And we really think about what it takes to educate the future. It's really important.
Yeah. It's
my masterpiece.
It's life's work.
Working on it.
Life's work that could be written, a couple of different ways, that's for sure. Well, Tobey Eugenio, thank you so much. You are episode 105.
Oh, that's exciting.
That's exciting. And there's so much more. There's always so much more. It's always I always feel like just about 10 of the hours when we start to hit the stride, really get into the meat and potatoes, and of course, but being an old advertising guy, we always subscribe to always leave them wanting more.
Yes. Well, and I think we've spoken of this, but I have some amazing young women who would love to share their voices, and I would be honored to help facilitate that. And you can hear it directly from the 10 to 14-year-olds who really have lots to say.
Yeah, I think especially the ones that we know are on that target. They've got the tail of that comet. Because looking back, in years from now, it'll be a jaw drop probably for them as well as everybody else. There are those who are blessed knowing full well what their trajectory is going to be, and there are others who just ping like radar and just bounce around until they finally find that hole wherever it is and get themselves out. So it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference. Thanks for joining us. One more time, it's Ron Fortier with our guest, Tobey Eugenio from our sister school. And this is the In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artist Index and generously supported by the fine folks at Heavenly Spirits Imports. And we are working in collaboration with the Whaling Museum and their Common Ground project. Stay tuned for more information on that. Without further ado, bye-bye.
The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere. Learn more at heavenlyspirits.com. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Be the artist you believe you are, and let's take care of each other out there.